What if the reason you're overwhelmed at work isn't the volume of the work itself, but the fact that your calendar is quietly filled up with commitments that no one ever re examined? Most recurring meetings aren't still on your calendar because they're essential, they just never get removed. But there's a bold and quite simple thought experiment that exposes just how much of your calendar might be negotiable. So stay tuned to learn how to apply this framework for yourself. Welcome to the Do More, Stress Less podcast. I'm your host, Alexis Hasselberger, a time management and productivity coach. In every episode, I give you actionable, practical tips to help you learn to use your time in a way that feels good to you every day. No more hustling, scrambling, or struggling to keep your head above water. So let's dive in, and soon enough, you'll be doing more and stressing less. You have way more meetings than you need on your calendar. You're attending meetings that have long or outworn their usefulness. You're attending meetings that are way too long. You're attending meetings that could have been an email, that you were invited to without knowing why. Meetings where you're multitasking, waiting for the off chance that your name will be called and that you'll need to answer a question. Am I right? Now, if you work in a professional job, I'm fairly certain that everything I just said is true for you, because it's true for all but the smallest number of my clients, at least before we start working together. In fact, many, many years ago, my very first coaching client, he had 40 hours of recurring meetings in his calendar every single week. That's a full work week full of meetings. No wonder he was so stressed and he couldn't get his job done during the workday, working late into the evenings and on weekends. Now look, I have talked about calendar audits before, and I still think they work great. In fact, that's how we cut that client of mine's meeting load in half while increasing his performance. But today, I want to talk about a much more drastic method, a gutsier method, a braver method of right-sizing your meetings. A method that's likely to cut down on all those meetings even more without losing one iota of productivity or letting things get lost in translation. Now, what am I talking about? Zero-based calendaring. Now, what the heck is zero-based calendaring, you might be wondering? Well, it's like zero-based budgeting, but for your calendar. In zero-based budgeting, instead of looking at last year's budget and making tweaks where needed, you start fresh. Blank sheet, fresh eyes. Now, what if you did that with your calendar? Now, I'm not saying go and cancel every meeting on your calendar willy-nilly without consulting anyone. That's obviously not a good look, and as tempting as it may be, you know it's not a good idea. So instead, I want you to think about this as a thought experiment. First, imagine that your work calendar is blank. Okay, and then bask in that glory for a second, right? Okay, but imagine that it's no meetings, it's as fresh as your very first day on the job. And then I want you to think to yourself, okay, what meetings do I need in order to move my work forward or to move my team's work forward? And then I want you to think about the quality of those meetings, right? How long should these meetings be? Who should be in these meetings? How frequent should these meetings be? And don't let your existing meetings guide you. Remember, we're starting fresh. This is zero-based calendaring. Now, after you've done that, you can compare what you came up with to what's on your calendar right now. And then you can ask yourself a few more questions. You could say, okay, well, are there meetings that I want to cancel or maybe excuse myself from altogether because I don't need to be there even if other people do? Are there meetings that you can delegate to someone else on your team? Maybe only one person from your team needs to be on a particular meeting and they can bring back the notes to everyone else. Are there meetings that could just be an email? I bet there are. And are there meetings where you could suggest a change in format, in function, in length, or in frequency? Then once you've done that, once you've thought through it, it's time to start with some low-hanging fruit and to start making or socializing some experiments around this. Now, here's a pro tip. Using language of experimentation is often much more effective than using language of change. Almost everyone is willing to experiment, but almost no one wants to change. So use experimentation as the framework, as the language. And then if the experiment works, then people are going to be much more likely to want to change it because it's already worked, right? Now, if you want to take this to a whole another level, like if you're in HR or if you're a manager or if you're a founder or an exec, well, you might be well positioned to try out a strategy that at least two brave companies that I have heard of tried. So I think it was Dropbox and Asana, and they tried this with amazing success. But it's basically called a meeting apocalypse or a meeting doomsday or a meeting Armageddon or a our meeting Geddon or whatever you want to call it. And at these companies, here is what these badasses did. So overnight, they canceled every single internal meeting. Now, internal only, right? We're not doing this with external, internal only meeting across the whole company. So maybe you're not going to be doing this unless you're the founder or, the CEO. But maybe you could do it on your team. They canceled every single one. And then employees showed up to empty calendars one morning, along with an email, of course, explaining to them what was going on. Aside from those external meetings, which were still on their calendars. And here's the kicker. They were told that they couldn't add any additional recurring meetings for 2 whole weeks. Now, why? Well, because if you let people add meetings right away, they were afraid that people would just add from memory all the meetings that had just been removed, right? And they wanted to give folks a few weeks without those recurring meetings to do the thought experiment that I outlined, just a few minutes ago, or a version of it, and to figure out what meetings they really needed without being tied to the past. And what happened? I bet you're wondering. Well, after a few months, people were saving between 11 and 32 hours a month in meeting time. That is a lot. That is almost, at the high end, that is almost a week. Now, are you shocked by this? Here's why you shouldn't be. Your calendar is additive. Once a recurring meeting is added, it almost never goes away. You feel like it's rude to bring it up, right? And yet, imagine what you could do with 70% fewer meetings, right? I bet you'd get your whole job done during the workday almost every single day. So how about it? Are you up for a little zero-based calendaring experiment? Now, if you try it, will you promise me to report back and tell me what happened? And that's a wrap on today's episode of the Do More, Stress Less podcast. If today's episode resonated with you, make sure to subscribe now so that you can save yourself time in the future and never miss an episode. It'll take 5 seconds to hit subscribe, and the payoff will be big. You'll never have to think about it again. And pro tip, you'll be using the decide once strategy and saving yourself from the fate of decision fatigue. Do yourself this quick kindness, and I'll see you next time.